both necessary and sufficient for a pattern of coordination to emerge, as well as the movement to emerge itself, right? So the movement has been explained is in the motor domain. So what about the cognition? How the different sequential of behavior, that is the pattern of behavior, is being organized. So in DFT, basically the DFT tries to explain the cognitive properties, how it emerges from these representational states grounded in sensory and motor domains. And DFT critically try to explain in theoretical language how this cognition is embodied in all the neural dynamics in from the perception, action, and towards the cognition. So that's the basic ideas of DFT. And the foundation of dynamic field theory, we all obviously know that human behavior is generated from nervous system. There is no doubt from that. And the process accounts should be understood on neural principle as such, because the movement is generated in the nervous system. And understanding it in the neural principles is as much as necessary. And if you look at the important research work of the Baltimore, I think it's Baltimore vehicle system. It explains the challenges in explaining the behavior in terms of neural principles. So in this the Baltimore's vehicle system, it has four components to it. One is sensory system, which which is basically a sensors which receives input from the or the other environment, and it has a motor system which turns these sensory input variables into one physical variables like forces, as if our muscles are doing. And there is a nervous system which connects or which links this internal variable and along with the to the physical variables to create the physical variables. And the body here, it actually drives all these systems together. So this is something which they try to explain in terms of uh, uh, dynamic system. So the experiment went to next level, and they just explained it in terms of keeping it in an environment, unstructured environment, where there is a source which gives inputs stimulation to these sensors. And this dose, you can see it is nearer to this left sensor and it is farther away from this right sensor. Basically what it does is the strongest stimulation will be given to left sensor. You can see it is closer to the left sensor, and it gives weaker stimulation towards the right sensor. And what it basically does is, they call it as in biologically they call it as taxis. It usually should turn the body towards this source. That's what the emergence should be. And this strong stimulation makes weaker firing rates in this particular motor system, and this weak stimulus will make a higher firing rate in this particular motor system. That is how it will try to turn towards left. So imagine if you are in a wheelchair, and if you try to turn towards left, we will try to slow down the left wheel and try to move the right wheel faster. So that's how the movement of this axis will go towards the left. And once it reaches the source, it will stop moving. So that's how the experiment basically tells that the basically before this source, the vehicle is considered as a feed forward system, where the sensors will be perceived and it will be converted into physical variables, like it's in a feed forward view. But explaining the neural process account in a feed forward view is not an appropriate way to explain it. So they kept it in an environment, and all these four elements along with the environment, it basically forms a dynamical system, right? So it is from this narration we can what we understand is the uh, vehicle itself cannot produce, or these products itself cannot components itself cannot produce any meaningful movements. If there is to be a meaningful behavior which has to be emerged, it should be in an structured environment. So vehicle along with this environmental system, together it forms a dynamical system. That's how they're explained, right? So the actually dynamic field theory provides explanation for how brain gives rise to behavior via coordinated activity of population of neurons, right? So they will say it as activation variables. That is, The complete inner state of CNS is characterized by this activation variables. So it basically defines the firing rate of population of neurons, right? And DFT basically bases its hypothesis on continuous states of world or primary. So along with this continuum, how this activation variable is going to talk with another activation variable which is going to arise in the CNS, and how it transforms from one activation variable to another when each input, or in case of internal based learnings, how this action variable is going to change its state or transform state. That's what dynamic field theory actually explains. And some of the basic concepts of DFT are the word dynamic itself. It means from the Greek word, it means like power or force. So in classical dynamics, dynamics refers to core idea that movement can be explained and predicted from underlying causes, that is forces that acts on body, right? So in mathematics field, in modern mathematics, this dynamic system is the most developed system which has branches in many other disciplines. Even in physics, this theory of mathematical dynamical systems is used to explain many concepts as if in DFT. So basically, the dynamical systems with provided laws of motions like dynamics laws and things like that, the present can predict the future. So that's what the dynamical system, how they do in this model, particularly in this paper. It's what like they will predict, or they will try to explain when there is some impairment or some problem in some component of action, what will happen in such cases. So that's how the dynamical systems can be used to predict the future. Right. So we will see about one concepts like activation. So what it actually means is like the activation is something which explains the firing rate of neurons in the population of neurons. So the basic hypothesis is activity of populations of neurons within circumscribed brain areas that is tightly related to behavioral patterns. So that is how the neural process account or neural process supported within the CNS generate behavior. Right? And activation variable is something, as I told, measures of the neural activity within the circumscribed subpopulations of neurons. And the activation variables are always indexed with a number, and it is being expressed in a field, like if it's in a gravitational field or any other physical field. It is expressed in constructed in a field that is what is called as activation field. So coming on to the neural dynamics, what they tell about neural dynamics is the CNF is going to be continuously varying in varying in the respect to time, and we can also understand that CNS is not central nervous system is not a digital computer. It is not going to update time to time, or there is no evidence that the CNS is updating. Processing occurs from time step to time step. Also, in contrary, there is some evidence that online updating of CNS states that it occurs in a continuous time itself. It is not occurring a time step to time step. It is occurring throughout the time. So what neural dynamics does is it formalizes this postulate of continuous evolution of activations in continuous time. Right. So according to this, if the activation, we can just see it as activation variable u of t, and the solution of this particular equation tells the neural dynamics about this particular action variable. That is tau u dot is equal to functions of u. So u dot is something, the rate of change of u. Right. The simplest way to see this explanation is equation is, if you look at u as an particle, and if that particle is moving, the rate of change of that particle moving is something which is considered as u dot. So simply that can be understood as velocity. So velocity of that particular particle moving is the rate of change of that particular action variable. So that's the simplest equation which I could understand among all those complicated equations. And that's the neural dynamics, how they postulate this continuous evolution of particular action variables in respect to time. That's what the neural dynamics is. And the next concept is spaces. It's simple that in this model particularly, they term this space as a two-dimensional space, and explaining the possibilities in this particular reaching activity. They considered movement direction and movement amplitude, and usually this is represented in a two-dimensional space, and at the movement, you can see the movement amplitude and movement direction. And this peak particularly means that there is an action variable in a particular action field, and the positive values has impact over the downstream motor system, which particularly may have impact over the behavior or movement. So that's what spaces actually means. And activation field is another concept where the activation variables, that is the firing of population of neurons, are indexed with a number, that as a continuous values, right? This makes them an activation field. So if you can look at this picture, the input, which is basically some input from environment or any other thing, a gray line, which has an impact over this activation variable, the dark black line. And this activation variable is locally self-excited, and if the input is stronger, the self-excitation peak will be maintained, and that explains the emergence of behavior. And there will be a global inhibition which inhibits the other inputs below the threshold level, and this is how the activation variable happens in the activation field. And there are some other concepts like working memory and memory trace, where even sometimes the peaks can be formed, that is the activation variables peaks can be formed in terms of absence of input itself, by either internal based inputs or either by the learned working memory, right? So even in the absence of the input, you can see the peaks available. And memory trace is something, a second layer of these activation field, where there will be a learning of certain inputs. Learning from certain inputs will just elicit an peak without the input itself, right? So when the input, strong input is going to be prolonged from a fast time scale to a longest time scale, it will have an enhancement towards this memory trace, where working memory will decay and memory trace will form. So that basically explains how learning happens in behavior. So that's what memory trace is. So I like to show this particular simulation, which they have this in their website, where this yellow line basically tells the input, and this orange field tells the activation. So if this pointer is something, the input, if you go near some pointer, right? So this actually means the input deriving the peak or deriving the activation variable. So it can happen without the input itself. If I just remove the mouse pointer, you can see the without the input itself, the peak can be formed. That can be basically either a working memory or a memory trace, right? So this can be ideally thought in a way like, in DFT, peaks can be either formed with input or without input based upon the learning, right? So a thought in DFT is that this pattern of peaks, that is local decisions, uh, talk to one another, right? So for example, if you think like there is a cup of green cup or a blue cup in the table, it is basically thinking in terms of DFT. One pattern is speaking to another pattern. And if you think in terms of DFT in behavior, like reaching the cup of coffee towards the table, it's when this pattern actually interacts with the sensory and motor system to pick up the object. And the learning in DFT actually means the memory trace which is being formed, and the development in terms of DFT means shaping this memory trace along the developmental period, specific period of time, shaping it by practice or doing it again and again and things like that. So that's what actually the basic concept of DFT means. So there was an experiment done by Thielen and their colleagues on DFT on perservative reaching task, A not B task. Actually, this is the improvisation of the task done by experiment done by Piaget. Basically, what they did is in Piaget experimentation, what they did is they had these two trials, A and B, where A has a box and B has a box closed with a closed lid. They have an infant in front of them, and they will show a toy and put it in a box, and ask, move the box towards the infant and check whether which box does the infant reach. And particularly for the first trial, it will reach to the A. And at the second trial, they will take the uh, toy from the A box, and then they will keep them in the B box. Right? Again, they will make the box towards the reach the box towards the reachable area of the infant. The child, particularly the infant, particularly made an error by selecting A, not the B box at the second trial. But as the age develops, that is after 10 months or 1 year, the A error is not repeated when they try it on the older infants. So that experimentation was done by Thielen in a improvised way. Like, they don't include a toy here; they have just two boxes with lids. You can see these brown things as lids, right? So this experimentation can be explained in these particular fields, right? So what they did is they will just take one lid and wave in front of the infant and keep the lid down, right? And before that queuing starts, there will be two things already present in the child's visual field or the activation field. One is task input. They have two lid in front of them, and it has a sub-threshold activation which is being already arised in their activation field, and there will be some memory trace towards either lid. So these two uh, activation fields will not have power to elicit any higher peak performance in the activation variables. So when the special input is being given, like waving and waving the lid, that is a cue, you can see the activation field being formed towards the A location. And when the box is being moved towards the child will go towards the A location where the activation field has already been formed. Right. So that's how the behavior has been emerged in these concepts. And this final one is when the box is being moved towards the child, the boost is something which has excitation towards all the fields in the table where the child can reach. That is what the boost means. Right? So this is a basic task which explains activation fields, specific input, task input, memory trace, and boost. Right. So that's the basic concepts of DFT. I hope so. Right. So the reaching. Now we will just discuss on this particular paper, reaching for
Ravi,
objects. Yes, sir.
yeah, can you just give a minute break? Can you just go from first slide to this? Can you just move on after the other slides? So primarily, you're telling that um, there are few options which can happen when a moment is going to occur, and um, there might be a selective preference towards one action.
One action.
If there is a selective preference towards one action, the other actions will all be automatically inhibited.
Yes, sir.
Right. So, okay.
So in this actually it means that activation field. Yeah.
Okay. What is this activation variable?
That is basically firing rate of subpopulation of neurons in the CNS.
Okay. Yeah. No. So here in this, you're telling that
Neural dynamics is actually the mathematical representation of the process accounts of behavior.
okay. So it's continuously, it will be all the time active, and continuously one or the other thing will be coming out of it, right?
Yes, online updating, and it's continuously going to happen. And the mathematical representation of this continuous process is what neural dynamics is.
Okay. Okay.
What is online updating?
When a movement is being initiated, even before the initiation itself, the activation peaks and all these variables will be activated. And throughout the performance or throughout the behavior, there will be, I think there will be reference copy, something like that, which will be updating towards the continuum of time in the same.
Okay.
Sir?
Yeah.
Right. So now we will move on to the actual paper itself, reaching for objects and neural process account in a developmental perspective. So the introduction of this particular paper, which tells that reaching and grasping objects is an evolutionary late achievement, and throughout the animal kingdom, the animals used to uh, particularly mammals, where the eye is attached to their head or beak, they will use this particular visual surveying movement, that is you can see in this particular picture, where the sensor camera kind of sensor is going to be attached with the effector itself, and it will direct the effector towards reaching any object. But in humans, where reaching with a separate actuator, that is limb, upper extremities or lower extremities, which is farther away from the visual field, which makes it uh, difficult to understand how this reaching task is being performed. And you can also see that humans always excel at object oriented movements, that is reaching activities, than any other primates, right? And you can certainly tell that this is a developmental achievement, and it can be witnessed by a series of long intense period of learning to reach, right? And the basically the space around us and its orientation and navigation can be or may be achieved by unsegmented visual information. So from our visual array, the reference frame about the space is going to be formed into a reference frame in respect to the body, and all these informations will be achieved, like spatial orientations and navigations of reaching and things like that can be achieved through this visual information. But there may be some demands on particular object perceptions when we try to reach towards an object. These are some of the demands, like to reach or grasp an object, the object must be visually segmented against its background, and it's supposed to be estimated where it is and what is the orientation of that particular object towards you, how far it is, and things like that. And the second demand will be transformation of a particular spatial information what we got from our reference frame into a motor commands, right? So for example, in which direction, how much amplitude, these has to be transformed from the spatial information into the motor commands. And the third problem will be motor commands, which should be generated to drive the hand particularly towards that particular object. And there should also be a small enough terminal velocity to grasp the object effectively, and that's one demand. And the fourth one is solving degree of freedom, where there will be a multiple ways to perform that particular movement or particular reaching activity. The multiple muscles around the joint may act in a multiple way to particularly uh, do that particular reaching activity or object oriented activity. How it solves the DOF, that is degree of freedom, is still under limited understanding. And the final problem would be how the system is going to initiate and terminate the reaching activity. Right? So these are certain demands which they explained in that first part of the introduction. And theoretically, observing this particular reaching task or object oriented action or behavior from the developmental aspect of view might make us to understand how this particular pieces come together, how this particular reaching task or of the particular object oriented task has emerged, or how it came together. So theoretically, studying development of reaching from the developmental aspect or developmental perspective is really hard, because the babies do not follow instructions, and even though if we make them to follow and repeatedly reach and things like that, there may be attrition, right? And also when we attain particular trajectories from the baby, we cannot actually uh, detect when is the onset or when is the termination, right? To date, there are three different data from these three research groups, like Von Often, Thielen, and Bater. These three data explain theoretically about how this reaching activity has been developmentally learned from infants in early infants to the infants. But these has a particular problem, like they do not constrain the theoretical accounts, like the motor learning is not going to happen at the specific period of time, right? The learning actually happens every hour the baby is awake. It happens at the each and every time the baby tries to do some motor skills, it is mastering its motor skills. Even though they have included longitudinal studies, uh, the actual process of motor learning is actually difficult to observe, even though they are provided longitudinal studies. So that's what the problems in these data is. So in this model, they try to explain, in this particular paper, they try to explain how this reaching task has different components, how it's being performed using those components. And to date, there is no complete neurally grounded theory for reaching. And understanding reaching requires not just motor learning, it has different components from perception to control, right? So perception, action, cognition, and control. So usually, if the learning is going to be happen autonomously, it requires a lot of infrastructures. That is, learning is not going to happen in a learning regime, right? So it should be something which is being imposed from outside. So understanding these, how these neural events takes place with a considerable interaction between those action variables, considerable delay or excitation or inhibition, how this happens is what this actual goal of this paper is going to explain. So coming to the goals of this paper, this we will review the component processes to successfully reach for and grasp the object. So what are the components which are required to complete this reaching task? Right, that's what I'm going to explain. And rest of the other goals illustrating how this concept through a neural dynamic model in a simulation robotic plant, how they did it using this concept. And when there is an impairment or when there is a problem in particular concept, that is a particular components of this reaching task, what happens during that particular impairment. And at the final stage of this paper, they will try to explain how the organization of motor acts can be learned autonomously from the behavior in a limited extent, right? So that's the goals of the paper. And neural process account of reaching is, we can see the reaching task as it in this picture. So neural networks of the brain are linked to sensory and motor system, and neural principles can be articulated and used to develop process accounts of behavior by neural population activity. So as I already told, the activation variables is something which makes the movement to emerge, and one activation variable will speak or talk with other activation variable. It transforms to sensory or motor system, and that's how the emergence of the behavior would be. And DFT is actually positioned at this level. And in DFT, the neural networks of behavior are mathematically expressed, and how the properties of this strongly recurrent networks are used to generate behaviors. It is what they have formalized in DFT. So if you can see in this picture, they have five components actually entailed in making a reaching movement. One is scene perception, another one is movement preparation, another one is movement timing, movement control, so motor control, and movement initiation and termination. So each and every components they have explained. I'll just be very brief on these components. So scene perception is the first and foremost thing which actually happens before the movement itself. So object-oriented movements behavior requires a perception of the environment and attentional selections of the object, which actually can be done by vision. That is, usually it is a visually driven activity, and uh, it can also be done without seeing or visually driven property. Like sometimes we can memorize the uh, objects in the room and we can reach it without our vision itself, right? So humans are very good at perceiving and memorizing certain particular things. And in this way, uh, it is one of the this scene preparation is tightly linked to looking and attention. So it is one of the visual salient feature of vision, that we attentionally select one object and fix our gaze or fix our vision towards that object, and such salience is formalized as neural dynamics, right? And even if we have many things potentially we can see in our environment, but there is a certain attentional foreground at any moment in time where we perceive only certain objects in our environment attentionally. So this can be considered as a scene representation instead of scene perception, right? So scene perception based on memory and attentional selection can be considered as representation. And this actually explains how the scene perception is being attention is selected towards one input and globally inhibiting the other input below the threshold level, and that's what the scene perception is. And movement preparation basically or prepared ahead of their initiation. Uh, there is ample amount of evidence that movement preparation usually starts ahead of their initiation. Even the activation in the motor cortex, in the premotor cortex, precedes initiation, right? And it actually predicts the movement parameters even before the movement has started itself. And reaching movements directed at an object start out in a direction of object in adults itself. So if you look at the representation of an environment in this particular reference frame, the initial place of an of our hand will be considered as a reference axis, and the object which we need to reach is fixated, and the line which shows here is a moment amplitude, and this arrow mark tells the moment direction. These are some sort of parameters which are planned even before the movement starts itself, right? And this characterizes the whole movement itself. So these are the movement parameters, spatial movement parameters, which the CNS predicts even before the movement has been started. And the movement timing part of this particular behavior, object-oriented behavior, is reaching movements like almost all other voluntary movements. It is timed in manner, so it has to be performed in a coordinated manner. So ants trajectory and velocity profile has some characteristical values or shape which can be reproducible across several repetitions or in an every scales with a movement amplitude. And if you can see in this particular handwriting task where explained by some research group, they just told that this corresponding piece of arc forming the E, actually this corresponding piece of movement, relative timing of this particular corresponding piece of movement is going to be invariant, that is, it's not going to change along the different spatial scales, right? So the reaching movement, it also sometimes the reaching movements are coordinated across limbs, right? And if one limb is delayed in reaching the objects, and the other limb may compensate or coordinate in order to adjust it to the relative timing. So the timing will be once the timing is being created, it will not be it will be invariant, it will not change, right? So the coordination will happen even across the limb. Sometimes even perceived events will also have coordination. When the object is moving, we will try to actually reach towards the object in the perceived notion of the event, right? Like catching a ball, moving object, like that. And coordination is maintained even if there is not as even in such situations where it is not strictly necessary, right? And a theoretical understanding of this particular timing in this model, they have understood in the particular way called as oscillator. So oscillator are something which is considered as clocks which produces the stable limit cycles. The stable means the stability of this particular limit cycle means that this time generation, which this time course which has generated, will not change itself, right? So it will resist to change. So neural oscillator consists of something called as excitatory population that is reciprocally coupled to an inhibitory population. So when an input is being transformed, like from a spatial scene perception and movement preparation and then the moment timing, these parameters will create this oscillator to create some stable limit cycles, and it will have something called as it will form some peaks which represents the movement plan. again in the actuation field, and it drives some subpopulation of neurons, which will produce some amplitude and moment timing, which will ultimately generate a successful reaching movement. And after the movement completion, it will automatically inhibit itself, and the activation will be remain in the subthreshold level itself. So that's the moment timing of this particular task. And it is of quite argument that why the timing signals are generated in spatial terms, right? So in terms of direction, in terms of speed from the movement preparation, the transformation of those spatial terms into timing in the terms of a stable limit cycles, why it is being generated in such a spatial terms. And there are some neural data which supports like idiomator principles. Movement is generated in the same reference frame in which it is perceived. So if a movement is going to be performed in such a reference frame which has a movement direction and movement amplitude, and it should be generated in such a reference frame itself. So that's what diameter principle actually tells. And the fourth component of this particular teaching task.
Naveen, 1 second. Can you just go to the first 3 points and then shall we come here?
Yes, sir.
So in this, they are telling that once we have multiple objects, we are directly looking only a part of it, the most
Yes.
important part of it, and our attention is directed towards it, right?
Yes, sir.
So the attention is directed towards it, all the others are automatically inhibited.
Inhibited.
Right? Okay. Right. So
That's one of the salient feature of this particular neural dynamics. And second component is movement preparation.
that one is automatically happening, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It might be based upon working memory, learning memory trace, like we have seen in that A not B task.
Yeah. So it automatically we are accustomed to concentrating on to
Yes,
that
either through input, without input also it can happen.
It can happen. Okay. So here during preparation, they are taking 2 variables, right?
Yes, sir.
So one is the amplitude and the other one is the direction.
Yes.
Right. So these 2 variables are
characterizing the movement.
Okay. Right. Next one. This I'm slightly I'm not getting how does this moment timing
actually happens. Okay, so they explain this in this model. Particularly, they explain the moment timing in terms of oscillator. That is a device which produces stable limit cycles. So they thought that that's how the CNS is producing time cycles, timing in terms of producing a movement. So what it actually does is based upon the parameters which it actually add some movement parameters like direction and amplitude. It is going to produce that particular limit cycles, which will make the movement to happen in a timed manner. That is coordination.
Okay, so like how you showed in the first picture that whenever we are moving the 2 fingers,
yes,
right, together, it can be either both of it together we are moving at the same rate, it will settle down in phase,
yes.
Or if you are moving it in the opposite direction, it will settle down in the exactly opposite thing.
Yes, sir.
Right. So so there cannot be multiple variations, and any state which is in between that, all those are inhibited automatically. Right.
Yes.
So you cannot move one finger at one speed and the other finger at other speed.
Yes. Stability is the important component of even coordination.
Okay, right. So the stability automatically. Okay, it allows only a few states to exist. Is that because I'm connecting it with that first point?
I too add limited understanding towards this moment timing, but what I actually add is this oscillator explains like when there is an initial stimulus from the environment, it sets some kind of an active transient, what they explain in the
Mhm.
properties, like the activation will rise and then it will fall down by its own inhibition
Okay.
before the movement. So
Mm.
that peak actually will be created by this particular oscillator. So what it does is it will produce that active transient for available movement parameters uh, in a several limit cycles, and these limit cycles combine together or coupled together to form a coordinated action.
Mm. Okay. I think it's slightly, and I think you can ask, you have to ask Shonar directly
Yes.
about this. Okay, right. Yeah.
Right. So in the fourth component of this is motor control, where how the chain is going to physically generate the movement, and for this the actuator, that is the hand, must be given some motor commands. Right. So usually the actuator is muscles. You can see muscles or extremity where these are attached to skeletal musculatures. These are called as actuators. So in what form do motor commands ultimately bring about this muscular activation? So one way we already saw in your previous Vasanta's explanation is this change in the threshold where the equilibrium point, and if the muscle length is above the threshold, the muscle activation is going to be induced, which generates the muscle force, and it will generate it will make the muscle to contract. Basically, uh, it will be explained in terms of analogous to a non-linear spring like this, where the resting length of that particular spring can be varied. So the variation in the threshold can have the muscle activation. So that's one form the motor commands can be given. And again, motor commands are also spatial in nature, and they may be derived from this particular spatial timings signal through a kinematic transform, like from and direction and speed from the previous parameters to the speed of the muscle length and their rate of change of muscle length. So that's how the coordinate transform from the movement parameters to the kinetic muscle length change is going to happen in case of this motor command generation. So such kinetic transforms also has some problems, as we already discussed in the previous few slides. Like uh, there are many muscles around the joint, and it has antagonist, agonist, which Vasan sir already explained in previous sessions. Like joint stiffness is something which happens because of co-contraction of that particular muscles. And in this model, joint stiffness is not specified by kinematic transformation, because we can see here it's a direction and speed which actually specifies the muscle length only, right? And it actually specifies the threshold of particular muscle length. It's not going to specify joint stiffness. That is one problem in using this as a model for explaining this model. And the second one is redundancy in muscle action. Again, there are several muscles acting towards this particular point or particular joint, right? So there are several joint angles, and predominantly selecting one particular joint angle will be a problem in creating such model if in case they are simulating. So what they did is, for joint stiffness, they just add the constant value of joint stiffness throughout the process itself to explain how this model is going to perform. And in redundancy in muscle action, what they did is they will just form a virtual joint angle depending upon all the muscle joint angles. Just one virtual joint angle they are going to be implemented in this model. And the third problem in this particular transform is kinetic redundancy. Again, multiple joints will move in a multiple direction, multiple way to achieve that particular task, right? Again, here they condensed all that kinematic transform at any moment. The time will select one particular virtual joint angle velocity vector to do a movement, right? So that's how they solve these problems in the particular model of neural process account of reaching to simulate the model. Am I clear?
So they are going to simulate and see how things are moving, how it's
Yes.
coming, right?
So what they did is they basically explained in a theoretical manner, but while implementing it, they have these problems which will arise if the model is being simulated. So
They actually simulated in the computer, right?
I think yes, in a bot, I think
Bot means
uh, biomechanical plant. They have, think it's
So similar to robot only, sir.
robots.
Yeah.
robot. Okay.
So I think they have some video in YouTube also, some reaching done by robotic hand. So in that
Okay.
model, they have explained it. So second part will be basically how these theoretical grounding will be used in simulation and what's the result of that particular simulation. That's what the second part is.
Okay. Yeah.
So the fifth component is movement initiation and termination, right? So how these movements are sequentially organized, how the movement is initiated and how it's been terminated. It's basically can be called as behavioral organization, and it as something like motor control models. In motor control model, this movement initiation and termination can be seen as a motor movement generation as a single phase, and in a cognitive model, it can be they explain this movement initiation and termination order of in the aspect of serial order of events, how one event happens after another. For example, if you are reaching for an object in movement motor control model, the object is going to be reached in particular movement amplitude and direction. In cognitive model, the movement is going to happen and it will followed by opening of hand, reaching and grasping of hand, and coming back to the resting position. And this serial order of events is explained in cognitive model, but it failed to address the time course and its interaction with the each and every event. For example, if there is an obstacle, the reaching has to avoid that obstacle and then it has to reach the object, right? So the switch from one phase to another phase may be delayed, and that delay they couldn't explain in terms of cognitive model. I hope so. That's understanding I had on the particular point, and this can be understood. Yes. So challenges to neural process account for behavioral organizations is like when there is a need to understand this particular relationship between events that occur at discrete moments in time, as I told, one event after another. So how there is a relationship between these particular discrete of events, and how there is a transition from one action to another. That is what we need to understand in particular model, and how the moment is going to be updated throughout the time, because the moment varies in time. There is an obstacle, the obstacle has to be avoided, and the delay will be there for the next event to happen, right? So how this delay has been managed, how the moment has been managed to occur in a delayed manner if there is some obstacle, because there might be an pre-planned preparation which has been actually happened in the brain, and suddenly if there is some obstacle, how it avoids it, how it manages to start the next event in a delayed manner. So these are some of the challenges or need uh, something which is should be understood in this moment initiation and termination. And this is particularly a developmental challenge, as explained by Von Often, is behavioral studies on infants explain that this happens in from the developmental stage itself. So it happens throughout the developmental stage, and it can be best understood in saccadic eye movement. Like, for example, if animals fixate some object, the saccade will not happen. The eyeball or the vision will be fixated towards an object. And if that input or that particular fixation visual structure is being removed, the saccade is initiated. Right? So the search for object will be initiated, and it will be initiated when there is fixation population which has actually appeared before that peak in the activation has been deactivated. So the saccade will happen when the fixation or visual structure is being removed. So the key idea is behaviors are activated or deactivated by dedicated neural nodes. So they explained in terms of three neural nodes in this particular picture. So what actually neural nodes do is they will modulate the condition at which these instabilities occur. For example, if there is some change in that particular moment or change in the timing or transition from one state to another, how these happens, they are explained in terms of these three neural nodes. One is intention node, where the task input. So basically, this picture explains that uh, the functions of three nodes in moment initiation and termination. So one is intention node, another one is COS, that is condition of satisfaction, another one is COD, that is condition of dissatisfaction. So when there is a task input, this arrow mark tells that there is excitation, and this red color dotted line this explains inhibition. So when there is a task input, there will be some neural node called as intention reach, which will be excited, and this intention reach will excite the intention to move. Right. Once the movement has been created, or once the virtual trajectory has been generated, once a shot of oscillations has been finished, the movement will be done, and this condition of satisfaction is something which will be activated when the input from the associated intention node here is matched by the sensory sources, which tells that movement has been successfully completed. So when the movement is successfully completed, it will just inhibit the intention to move, and it will remain in a resting level. Right. So another node which actually has inhibition over intention to move is when there is a removal of task input or vanishing of the particular task input in between the movement generation or something like that. It will just activate the condition of dissatisfaction, which tells that there is a failure of intended movement behavior. That is either failure in the removal of fixation or removal of object from the particular environment. So it will just inhibit the intention to move, and the movement will not happen itself. It will prematurely stop. Right. And there is COS reach, that is condition of satisfaction reach, where when the initial end effector, that is AND, is actually aligned with the target position already. If it is near the target position, it will not make the intention to reach to facilitate intention to. It will just inhibit the intention to reach itself. That is, initial EEF and target position matches, and this will inhibit the intention to reach itself. That's the end of all the five components. And this particular picture explains each and every component in a pictorial representation, that is survey over the neural dynamic architecture, how they developed it. This first box tells the visual perception, that is scene perception, where end effector and goal is being perceived, and how the movement plan is going to happen is what in the second box actually tells. And you can see the third box tells about the oscillator, where the time cycles will be produced by this particular coordinates transform to the next phase. And here it explains about the motor control commands, lambda integrator, which tells the resting threshold of muscles and things like that. And I think this correlated discharge is something Efren's copy of the movement or preparation or movement plan, which is being continuously sent to planning stage. And the final here is movement initiation and termination. That is muscle model, where how the sequence is happening from reaching, opening the hand and closing the hand and doing. So that's end of my presentation.
Naveen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think the fourth and fifth things needs to be slightly understood, but I think we can have certain terminologies, and then I think we may need to go slightly slow on this particular thing. Maybe after listening to Shauna, we need to sit and see each one component as separate and what is happening. That might give a coherent idea, because some parts seem understandable, some parts are not understandable. But I think
Yes.
At least the
So
terminologies we are getting. Yeah, please.
each model, each component, they are expressed in mathematical forms. They are sketched in differentials, and
Mhm.
they have solved the differential equation, and they have told this is how this component is functioning.
Okay, so
Maybe if we could understood that particular calculation part, we may come to some understandable level, I think.
that becomes difficult, but I think we can understand the logic of that. If we can at least tell this is input, this is the output, at least that part.
Yes, yes.
Sir, Hariom sir.
I don't know. I don't have anything to add. I have listened to this earlier, and I am not very clear with many things. It's rather difficult to understand.
Sir, if we call Shomer, will he be, will he talk? And I think we may need to do some pre-preparation, and then we may need to go and ask Shauna to explain some part, because he has produced a lot of videos and all of them are on YouTube.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
So at least if we go slowly, maybe 6 months we take in order to understand this concept, because here ultimately where they have come and ended is the lambda is generated,
Yes,
right?
sir.
And once the lambda is generated, I think the other processes, how it is being controlled, that equilibrium point model will give. So only thing is how the lambda comes out. They say that it automatically comes out, and there are few variables which are going into it and giving the input to the try and understand, then it might be fine. Sir.
When he was talking in this model, when I went to the course, I think this is the model he also talked. It was again 3 hours. It was very difficult to follow. Again, when it came to the last part of it, that is from the spinal cord to the effector muscles, he just said that as there are different models. You can take whatever model it is there. So I am not sure that they are, at least they are that interested in the last part of it, because what happens higher than that, that is the generation of the synergies is far more important to the theoretical idea. That's what the sense I got.
So
They thought the last part is more of cognition. How this is happened in a sequential manner. That's what they are trying to tell.
No, I'm just talking about the from the spinal cord to the effector. I understand that they do look into a lot of the cognitive, but that's what I was trying to say. They are more interested in the sort of the higher levels rather than in the lower levels of control. And also they had a lot of mathematics, as Naveen was saying, very difficult to understand. One thing from what I gather is from the lambda model or the equilibrium hypothesis and dynamic theory hypothesis, they have a different mathematics to do it. The whole thing is done in a slightly different mathematics. Because I can't understand what is the difference in that two mathematics, I'm sure how that is also relevant to that also.
Maybe we'll try going slower, one part after the other part.
Yes.
At some point of time, and maybe just ask him what is the prior reading we can have, and like how we understood the other parts, that's the EP model and the uncontrolled manifold. Maybe at least at that level of understanding, if you're there, then it might actually work out. Because the first component of the scene selection. No, that seems to be coherent with the um, ecological model. So,
And also that is vital for the robotics part of it, because most of their work is on the robotics, right? So if for the robot to understand what is happening, I think that's a sort of a far more vital part for them to have that. That's why there is a lot of talk about embedded cognition.
cognition.
But Naveen will also agree. I think, unlike other theories, there are loads and loads of information about dynamic field theory.
Yes, sir.
They have
Actually, I had this few slides in this. First two slides I've deleted. I just want to show how what are the works done in dynamic field. They are given in that book. It has a list of several articles done by different researchers. There are a lot of informations to go and gather.
Correct. And also they have a dedicated website for dynamic field theory also.
Yes, that's what I also shared here.
Right. So I think we
they
can
have,
look into it. Difficult to understand, but right. So difficult to understand, but we can look into it because they teach dynamic field theory separately also, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
You can see they have summer school by September 6th also this year.
Right.
Separate for dynamic.
What Anatole Feldman said was, Schoner is assuming that the whole brain is sort of a reflex arc. So whatever goes in, that will change the dynamics, and that will produce output.
Yes.
I don't know what it means, but that's what they said. Just repeating what they said. I don't know what it means actually, clearly. So that was their whole fight for 20 minutes. I just didn't understand what.
I think we need to just listen. And Schoner also talks in a language, at least not the mathematical part, but the other part, at least his language is pretty far more understandable than
Yes.
Initial 3 minutes he may talk in words, then he'll jump into mathematics.
No. You are correct, person. He is far more understandable than.
And I think when we ask question also, he tells with a lot of patience, and he tries to
correct.
understand what we are asking and tries to explain. So I think maybe we can try arranging a. We can first see and learn, and then after that go and ask him to conduct a workshop or something.
And also,
slowly about
it feels as though their ideas have a lot of. At least it feels as though there is some amount of sort of application derivation you can do from what they are talking about. Especially they do it in and out with robotics. So there should be some amount of value in terms of application, unlike other theoretical ideas. Because if we understand the oscillation correctly, which again I'm not very sure. If the system resets the oscillation to a particular limit for after if you have cerebral palsy or stroke or something like that, I'm not sure whether that's what Latash also says, where you can't push the system beyond its limitations, which it set by itself, and take it to a different equilibrium. Whether that is the same thing, I'm not sure. But it just feels that we have to be inside a particular upper limit and lower limits for that movement which it can produce.
It might not be very, in the sense anything is possible.
Correct.
how the system is organized in itself functionally.
Right. So it may have, you can think of it like this. My steering wheel, which is 360 degrees, can get stuck from, say, for example, 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock, right? Then to, as in the arc of your the clock, right, where it can get stuck in that. So I can only move within that limits. Whether they are talking about that, I'm not sure, but that's what I thought it was. But I'm not sure whether that is what it is. But that's what I think it might also have something to do with it in the macro level rather than in the micro level.
I think that kind of grasp, if we have a little bit more specifics, I think we should be able to just at least try and make meaning out of it. And then, because basically we need to just
the problem
have-
is if you start asking them about stroke, they just don't open their mouth, right? They just say that we don't know, we don't work with them. That is the biggest problem.
They are in the
Unlike
phase
us,
where they're trying to understand the normal.
right? Unlike us, where we have opinion about everything, they don't have an opinion about things which they don't study or things like that. It's difficult, but I think it's a very interesting theory for therapists as such.
No, okay. I think that's fine. And yeah, I think we need to stop here because 9:40. Riddhi ma'am,
Yes,
how much of presentation do you have?
Sir,
Can you-
actually it is around 35 slides.
Okay,
So
fine.
maybe 30 to 40 minutes, sir.
Okay, so 30 to 40 minutes, and that's going
Yes,
to be
sir.
a long time. So I
Yeah.
think we may need to have the whole week talking about it.
Sorry, is this about the same ideas?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
this is the continuation of the second part of the paper.
Oh, okay, right.
So I just think it might go very late, right? So probably
Yes, sir.
we'll just, yeah, Naveen, any ideas, Ash? Naveen, are you there?
Sir, can I speak, sir? So we
Yeah,
can,
yeah, ma'am.
if for the continuation, sir, we can have a brief idea of what they have done in results, sir. Because
Yes,
if
sir.
it is in continuation, it will be better, sir. So it will be easy for understanding.
Okay.
So that way we can continue, sir. Because it's mainly on results which are divided into two main parts. So that is the
Okay.
main thing which we want to see. So discussion, anyways, it's on their point of view. So results are main, sir. So as you say, sir.
Sure. Right, because we want to have a better understanding of things before even starting to ask what they are telling. Yeah. So if you're comfortable, I think it's fine.
Yes, sir.
We can just wait for some time. That's fine, because anyhow from tomorrow it's going to be 9:30 and 2 hours, 11 o'clock, 11:30. That's what is going to happen. So
Yes, sir.
I think we can train ourselves. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, sir. So, sir, you can make me the host, the other one which is mute, sir.
One
The other
second.
ID which is mute. Yeah.
The one which is
Muted. Yeah.
okay.
Okay, sir. I'll just make myself host from this ID. Is the screen visible to all?
Yeah, it's visible.
Yes.
Okay, good evening all. So I will be continuing the research from the part of results. So basically, the result is divided into two major experiments. And how did they do the experiment is by simulating the robot. So to illustrate the properties of the neural model, which was explained, they have done research in two ways. The simulation in two ways. One is in making a movement, and the other one is for developmental signature. So what stimulus did they give? They have used artificial visual inputs. These inputs were in the form of localized peaks of activation. Okay, so first I'll talk about this research. So what they did is, this figure 6 illustrates how the model makes the individual movements. So this is the initial hand position of the robot and 3 targets were given. Okay, so the parameters recorded were the trajectories and the velocities. So we can see that the movement paths, they're approximately straight here and they are slightly curved outwards, right? So they are generated by the virtual hand velocity profile. Now here on the right side of the screen, there are two graphs. So this is the first graph. This graph relates to the virtual hand velocity profile. Whereas the lower graph here, it correlates with the real velocity profile of the hand movement. Means actually the movement of hand is shown by this graph. So as you can see in the graph, when the actual velocity hand profile here is at the peak, this virtual velocity profile is at 0, right? So that means this movement has already started occurring, this internal movement already started occurring before the actual movement. So this is basically in the first part of the experiment. So normally when there is no degradation in the system, this is the normal graph obtained for the trajectories as well as for the velocity profiles. Now
one second, ma'am. What do you mean by that virtual profile? Is that
as far as I understood, this virtual hand velocity profile is the velocity which actually starts before the actual movement.
okay? This is what the brain is producing, something like that? Or,
yes, already produced by the brain. Actually, before the actual movement, there is a preparation phase.
okay.
So as far as I understood, this is the preparation phase.
Okay. Yeah.
So as soon as it ends, I mean, at the point where it is 0, our actual hand movement is at the peak.
Okay.
So this is what a normal movement was made. So this is the
Oh,
initial
one
position.
second. One second. Is this
Yes.
of a normal person or of a robot?
For a robot, normal robot.
Huh?
Robot, sir.
Robo simulation.
Yes. Simulation. Yes.
Okay. Fine. Yeah.
So simulation is done, and here 3 different targets were given. So this is the initial hand position, and we can see the curve, right? So why I'm emphasizing here is that in the next simulation, what they did, they added some degradation. So we have to compare this graph with the degraded graph. Okay. So now second part of the simulation is the developmental signature. We know that for all the components of the movement generation system must be in place. Then only we are able to actually reach the object, right? But what happens if one of the movements is degraded? They also did experiment by degrading any one of the component. We already know there were 5 components, but here they took up 3. First component was movement plan. Second was movement timing. Third was movement control. That means first simulation was done only when they degraded the movement plan and they obtained a result. Second simulation was done only with the movement timing and they obtained the result. Third simulation was done only with degrading the motor control and we got the graph. The fourth one was combination of all these 3. Okay, so let's see what was how was the experiment done. So this I've already explained the first line. Second point, they analyzed the result on the basis of two things. First one is number of movement units, and the second is straightness of the movement path. This I'll come on to it in the graphs. We can understand it better. So they were basically two analyzers, number of movement units, and second one was straightness of the movement path. And there were 18 trials done in a total. Total 18 trials were done. So let's see first, when they degraded the movement plan, what did they do? First, the lateral neural interaction within the neural field, which actually represents the initial position of the hand, was weakened. That means, what is the initial position of the hand? That interaction of the neurons was weakened. So the robot does not know where is the hand initially positioned. Because of this, what happens? The working memory becomes unstable, leading to a potential loss of movement plan. And because of this, the virtual movement trajectory is terminated prematurely. Virtual movement trajectory means the movement which actually occurs before the actual start of the movement or the preparation phase, right? Now, because the robot does not know what is the initial position of hand, so definitely the virtual movement trajectory will end prematurely. Is it clear, sir?
Yeah, ma'am, it's clear. Please keep going.
Yeah. So now I have compared the condition A versus the normal graph so that it's easy for us to understand. So let's see what happens in left side of the graph, that is trajectories condition A. You see the velocity profiles here, they are less smooth. If you compare it on the right side, they are comparatively smoother, correct? And here we do not see any kind of virtual velocity graph, right? So this has got many movement units. What I understood from these peaks and depressions is that it is motor unit, movement unit, sorry. So this had got more than one movement units. So this is due to the intermittent interruption of movement generation when the planic peaks are lost. So there will be intermittent interruption of the movement generation. And if you see here, the trajectory graph, it is almost a straight line. There is no curve as there is a curve here. So this is the graph obtained when the planning was interrupted, right? Now, second simulation was done when only the movement timing was interrupted, right? The neural connectivity from the field of neural oscillators that actually generated the timing of virtual trajectory was not tuned. In the first experiment, everything was normal. The robot was tuned, everything was already set. But to check how does it react into the degradation of movement timing, the oscillator was not tuned properly, so that the virtual trajectories do not reach the target in a single cycle. So let's see the graph for this. Again, let's see the trajectory condition B here. So here what we see is the virtual trajectory generated does not reach the target. See, it is away from the target. The red line ends before, even the green line, right? And even they are not smooth. One is completely straight, one is more curved, and it is not at all smooth, right? And similarly here we have got less smoothness as compared to the right graph. So this is what this is the result what they obtain when the movement timing was interrupted. Third part of the simulation was interruption of the motor control. So how did they do is the kinetic mapping from the virtual hand trajectory to the joint level motor command was not tuned. So whatever mapping was there between before initiation of the movement and preparation, they have not tuned that properly. So what happens is, now we see here how the graph above this trajectory condition C, can you compare the graph C with the normal graph? It shows that the movement paths are no longer straight, right? They are either away from the target and they're not reaching the target on exactly on the same path. Similarly, here we have got multiple motor units observed, right? As the system does not reach the target in response. So if we compare, now last part of the test was combination of all the three impairments, that is A, B, and C, all three was combined together. And please see the last graph here, this graph. This graph is the combination of all three, okay? So what we can make out from these graphs is that the developmental path suggests that impairment in the motor control induces the strongest variance. Motor control means the C graph. So here they found out that this motor control induces, if there is an impairment in motor control, it induces the strongest variance. And then next, it is seen in movement timing, that is condition B. And the least changes, they have found it in movement planning. So this is what they have drawn out from the experiment. Is it clear, sir?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay.
Are you going ahead?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
sir. This is the.
Before this, just we will stop here. 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Sir.
Dhaneva.
Yes, sir.
Sure.
Yes, sir. So
Yeah.
this picture is there in book, right?
Right.
Functional activity based approach has this picture and this movement unit and velocity profile. So I just wanted your opinion. Can you go to the previous slide?
Yes, sir. This one?
No, this one. No, the picture. Yeah. Sir, any inputs onto this?
I'm not sure what I'm assuming these were all run on the software rather than the hardware, right?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Right. So it looks similar to what happens in a person with stroke also, right? You get similar profiles, but you get two peaks mostly in the velocity
Especially,
profiles.
I think the third one, no, sir.
The last picture, right?
Okay, the last one, fourth one.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think we get that in humans. I think we get mostly probably the third one seems to be more what you get in stroke, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think these are more the trajectories look more as in case of stroke patients, right? Trajectories where
yeah, the trajectories, especially the third one, I see that.
Third one is it looks more like what you get in stroke, right?
In stroke, yeah.
But we don't get this many peaks, I think, in velocity. We get 2 or 3 mostly step-like peaks in case of brain injury, I think.
Basically, for others, I like to just add a point. When you tell the movement units, basically it is when a person is trying to reach for an object. Normally, what happens is in one go, we start, we end to the object, right? We don't slow in between or things like that. When we see a patient with stroke, normally what happens is they don't reach in one go. They go half of the distance and then they again restart the next one, again restart the next one. So that's what is the velocity profile. It increases, decreases, and so that gives movement units. Yes, sir. So I think that comes. Sir, that's it, right, sir?
Yeah, I'm assuming the idea is that if we have a better neural circuitry or better control, we have probably one or two smooth bell-shaped profiles rather than these step-like profiles, which says that the system is trying to work mostly on feedback rather than just making it into a continuous process, as Naveen was saying earlier. I'm not sure. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's fine. And, I was curious about the second one, especially the velocity profile.
Mm.
That looked more like a cerebellar ataxia. It goes fast and comes back.
Right.
Then the trajectory seems to be very straight.
Yeah, it's not overshooting, right?
Yeah, it's not overshooting.
Mm. Unlike
But,
3,
but
where
it's
the
undershooting. But it's undershooting.
yes,
I think
right.
the
It's not.
T1 and T2
Yeah,
is
all right,
undershooting.
right.
Mm.
But the overshooting looks more in 3 and 3 rather than.
And as a 3, actually, today we were reading on the paper on that Silna Niski's on that. I think Vipin might be able to pitch in and just connect it with that. Vipin, you have anything to say about the third one?
No, sir. Actually, I'm not able to correlate.
Okay, right. I think the third one, what the trajectories especially, it's like in the paper they had actually given a force field and that's altered the force structure, and they had seen that. And then in the initial stage, this trajectory was similar to that when the force field was altered. So probably, I think once we read that paper, the next paper, maybe this also might make a little bit of meaning there, especially the trajectory part of it. In that, we had a profile very similar to this.
But again, it shows that these simulations have far better value to us rather than at least we can probably in the next 20 years we can derive something solid from these two the treatment part, I suppose.
Yeah, it seems to really guide us as to where the problem could be there.
Yeah.
We might be able to target the problem at one level or the other level. Maybe that understanding, I think it might give us. Yeah. So that's good. No, yes, sir. Can we continue, sir?
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Really.
Thank you, sir. So shall I continue, sir?
Yeah, please continue.
Yeah. So now fourth part of the paper deals with the developmental learning process. As we all know, the autonomous learning is not well understood yet, but the study has illustrated some conceptual issues in learning from experience by restricting themselves to a particular subproblem, that is, the problem of learning to sequentially organize different elementary behaviors. What they say is that they have taken up some elementary behaviors and they have tried to sequence them in a series. And how are those sequenced? They have tried to explain us in a processing structure. Right? So these are the 5 elementary movement behaviors taken into account. First is visual fixation, then bringing the hand to a resting position, reaching, opening the hand, and closing the hand. Now, how these come one after the other is what they want to explain. And this is explained by on the basis of a structure, which I'll be showing you in this figure. So let's say A is one of the elementary behaviors and B is another elementary behavior. Now here, each elementary behavior consists of two neural nodes. You see here, this one is the intention node and the other one is the condition of satisfaction. So even behavior B has got this pair of nodes, right? What is the function of the intention node is that it initiates the motor behavior. It initiates the motor behavior and it projects its stimulus to this sensory motor surface. Okay. And this condition of satisfaction node, it receives the input from this sensory motor surface that signals that the movement behavior or the motor behavior is completed. So that means completion of motor behavior is received by this COS or condition of satisfaction. The intention node is actually self-excitatory. And this intention node, as we can see here, is coupled with the inhibitory node. This INH is an inhibitory node. Now, these two nodes may be in different dynamic regimes, means that either they may be in an on-off state or maybe in a continuous on state, right? So if the intention node is in a continuous on state, that will lead to a babbling behavior. So if the intention node is in a continuous on state, that will lead to a babbling behavior. Now moving on to the connections between A and B. Those two are connected by this precondition node. Okay. So if the precondition node is activated, like this, if this precondition node is activated, then what will happen to the behavior B? Will it get activated or inhibited?
Inhibited.
Yes. So if this precondition node is activated, this B behavior will be inhibited, correct? Now, if this condition of, one second. Condition of satisfaction gets activated, what happens? It will inhibit the precondition node, correct? So this will remove its inhibition from the behavior B and then behavior B can start, right? So this is how it goes on. Now we see between behavior A and B, there are two more interneurons, right here. So one node, it receives excitatory input from the condition of satisfaction, right? This arrow means excitatory input. And this same node receives an inhibitory input from behavior B, right? So it becomes active, this first interneuron I'm talking about. One second, I'll just point it. This one. So if it becomes active if behavior A was completed, correct? Now, if behavior A is completed, this will become active. Okay. But till now, behavior B is not activated. So through the self-activation, you see this arrow, this tells that it's a self-activator. So it keeps on activating self, right? So it acts as a working memory. Through self-activation or the self-excitation keeps that activation in a working memory. This node provides excitatory input to the second node. This is the second node, right? Which becomes activated once behavior A is activated. That second node reflects a particular sequential history of activation, isn't it? When we know that behavior A is activated, so behavior A is completed. So once behavior A is completed, it will activate the first node and it will be in self-excitation, right? And then this will give an excitatory impulse to the second node. So this is a particular sequence which is followed, right? So first A is activated, and then after that only B will get activated. So if we see here, yeah, whenever A gets completed, then only B will get activated. They cannot be activated simultaneously because of these various inhibitory input given to behavior B when A is activated. Is it clear? This is the basic processing structure they told about the behaviors. They've introduced the nodes and these two extra nodes even.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. So now what they did is, this study performed simulations in which either of the two possible targets were presented all the times. Now instead of 3, they are given only instead of 3, they have given only 2 possible targets. Now in this experiment, the movements were autonomously generated, and that was a babbling behavior. Now we'll see how does the part differ in the phases of learning, because we are studying about the developmental learning process. So this graph shows the different phases of learning. Phase 1 is the earlier phase, phase 2 is the middle phase, and phase 3 is when they have reached the point of learning. So these two circles says that there are only 2 targets given. Okay. Early in learning, the reach behavior becomes activated with or without a prior fixation behavior. Now, when I'm talking about A and B, it says that when only A is activated, B will not get activated, right? And when we are in early stage of learning, usually the reach behavior is activated first, right? So you can see here, reaching is there, but the target is not reached properly because there is no fixation done. Fixation is the second elementary behavior, right? So you can see there are many trajectories for reach. Some are passing beyond the target, some are ending before the target, right? But once the learning process continues, if you compare the phase 2, where fixate then reach has been learned, this line. Once the sequential organization, that is fixate then reach, is learned, the reaching movements occur less frequently. Why does it occur less frequently? Because we know once behavior A is learned, now because behavior V also has to be learned, so that becomes inhibited. A will become inhibited, right? So here reaching movements occur less frequently because they are inhibited unless a fixation is preceded. So this is about phase 2, right? Then reaches tend to be successful. Here almost not completely, but yes. Now in phase 3, when the learning phase is completed, so the reaching is almost good, but you see the density of lines here. Again, it has increased as compared to phase 2. Here what happens is both fixate and reach have been boosted, and reaches are more frequent and are directed at the visual target. Now this can be understood better in the next figure. If you see figure 11 and you compare the lines here, so the strength of development of this elementary behavior, that is reach, is always higher in this experiment as compared to fixate, right? So reach was developed earlier than the fixate. That is why here reach was developed earlier, right? And there were many reaches. And once fixation started, when it was started to be learned, so the reaches, number of reaches became less because of its inhibition. And this right figure, it shows only the boost to the preconditioned neural node. Now we know that there is a preconditioned neural node, and that neural node was boosted for fixate then reach only. Okay, not for others, not for open and close. Why? Because they said that there was no reward given for open and close. Reward was given for reach. So it has developed properly. And because there was no reward given for open and close, so development is not much. So this is what I have understood from the second experiment, what they have done.
Okay. Ma'am, especially in this particular slide, I understand the first one and the second one.
Okay.
Right, but the third one I'm not getting, because in the first one you said the fixate is not developed, but reaching happened, so it was very erroneous. Right?
Yes.
And in the second one, the fixate is developed and it was inhibiting the reach part of it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
The third one, it should be either one, no? At one point of time, either fixation should happen or it should happen. So again, what is how do you explain the third one? Any
Actually, sir, this phase 3, it actually represents the learning process, right? So here, learning of fixation was not done properly. Here, learning of fixation and reach was intermediate, right? Here, both they have achieved together. Now, this
Okay.
is the last phase of learning. That's why there is less of error.
Okay.
Yes, sir. That is what I don't know, sir. Please let me know if I'm wrong. This is what I've understood, sir.
So
Okay.
can I try it?
Yeah, Naveen.
So basically, in this first picture, it tells that early phases, that is pre-reaches in early infancy. That experiment done by Von Often also tells the same. The child will just reach wherever it wants. It doesn't look at the object and reach. So it may accidentally reach the object or it may not reach the object. That's the first picture. And second one is where the next slide tells that the fixate is being also boosted up. We can see in the green line, which is a reach, and the red line is fixate, but it is under the reach. That means that it is not yet developed. We can think like that. So that is the reason why the reach is happening, but the fixation is not yet developed, so it will not reach or complete the target. That's the second one. And third one is where both the fixate and reach has been developed at the end stage. We can see in the boost next slide, you can see at the end stage, you can see that it is reaching at the top where the red line and green line is going to be attained. That is reaching and fixation is going to attain. So in that case, the frequency of reaching is going to happen much more than the other phases, because reaching the object and grasping the object itself can be considered as reward. So once the object is grasped, that can be considered as a reward. So that reward makes it to perform again and again. The likelihood of performing it again and again, it may be increased. So that is the reason why there is a lot of red lines in phase 3 towards the target.
Okay. That's
Yes, sir.
very informative.
I'm happy they did it not today itself, not the other day, because otherwise
Yes.
it would have been would have not understood much, I think.
And these are software driven, but these graphs also has been matching with that Von Ofsen study and also some of the Thielen studies where they have done it in early infancy and late infancy period, and how the child achieves pre-reaching, from pre-reaching to reach, and how it fixates the object and reach. And actually it is aligning with that, so they are pretty sure what they are telling.
Okay.
So, sir, this was all about the experiments done and how they explained it.
Although it's a simulation, it's more clearer when as compared to normally when we study that. And I think
Yes, sir.
the input part of it might not be able to be controlled, as Naveen clearly told. So here they had controlled the input and they have studied the behavior. So, but the only thing is, according to Anatol Feldman, when we are finding something in a simulation which is very close to what we observe, it needn't necessarily be functioning in the same way. That's a word of caution. But even beyond that, this seems to be more convincing.
Yes, sir. In the next part of paper, in the final discussion, in limited manner, they have explained about the limitations in this particular simulation.
Okay.
So those problems in scene perception, movement preparation, what happens in this simulation, and how they solved it, or potentially new research questions from the particular problems can be used to do our further researches. That's what they have told primarily in discussion session.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Sir, inputs, sir.
I don't have anything to add here. So I think it was clearer when read as a continuation of what Naveen has said. I think it's clearer now.
Yeah, it's very clear. Yeah. Anyone else? Any questions do you have, or anything to tell about this novel concept which you're learning?
Hello.
Yes, sir.
All these things are done in robots,
Yes, sir. In robots.
So it is early learning also in robots only.
Yes,
It's,
sir.
how they compare with the human beings.
So I think previous study have been done, sir, as told by Naveen, sir, and
Okay.
that they have compared it with this study as well.
That's initial part they did with robot, that is that reaching part, normal
Okay.
reaching, and those impairments and these developmental learnings and all they simulated in software. They're
Okay.
just using that normal model which I explained, using that calculations and solutions. They're just modified here and there according to phases. In the early phases, they will change some values in accordance to have a difference in that fixation and reach, and in phase 2 and phase 3 changing the values on that particular things, how they achieve this particular trajectories.
Okay.
So basically what happens is when we try to understand the motor control, there are quite a number of models of experimentation they have, and they use, it's a paradigm of experiment. Right? So if we can understand what's the paradigm of the experiment, we'll be able to understand what are the strengths and limitation of a particular thing. And according to that experimental paradigm, what are the results? That's how we need to see. So how like different theories are there. There are also different experimental paradigms. And unfortunately, since we are completely not involved in doing experimentation,
Yeah.
it requires a time to understand the experimental procedure and a time to understand the output about it. So that's
Okay.
Yes, that might be the reason they have not done experimentation in humans.
No, basically what they try to do is they try to interpret what can be in humans by measuring that separately. And
Okay.
here they simulate it, and then they try to run and they see how it is happening. And then what they do is they tell that since that behavior is similar to this or different from that, the model which they have finally come out with could be right or wrong. Right, and that might be how the human system could be functioning.
Okay.
So they take experiments done on humans and apply it to robots or simulations, and then they run it over there, and then they try to equate it to how our system could be functioning. So if they set before starting the experiment, they set 10 results should be coming, and these should be the result. They will first hypothesize. And then if it comes, they'll accept that, okay, this could probably be the method by which the nervous system is controlling. That's one paradigm of experiment. Any other questions? Okay, right. So if no other question is there, I think we will we will stop here. And that was a really a fabulous thing. And thank you, Naveen, for explaining what's the um, dynamic field theory. Right? First, giving us some glimpse of it. Although at the current point of time, we have a lot of limitation understanding it, that was very much necessary. Otherwise, we might not have understood most of the other aspects. And
Yes.
also basic concepts were introduced. And secondly, Riddhi ma'am has also presented it in very much clarity, taking out, I think you might have read more, Riddhi ma'am, I think you might have
Yes.
read more things and you have cut out on things which were
Yes.
unnecessary, right? I
Yes,
think that
sir.
would have been the toughest part of it.
Yes, sir.
But
Thank you,
it's
sir.
really the crux of it we could understand. So
Yes, sir.
thank you for doing all the hard work.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
And Naveen, thank you so much for introducing. I think it is showing some promise. I think we can spend some time with this.
Okay. I just want to read the last line of this paper.
Yeah, please.
We are only at the very beginning.
Enough of it.
That's the last line of this paper. So,
That's the last line of the paper.
yeah.
Okay. So after 40 years, they are telling for young scientists to come in. We have a lot of options. Right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's great. Thank you, Naveen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sir, closing comments.
It was some other, whenever I come, I really had a good time today also. The other day also, I was very much impressed with how complicated things are put across in a very similar fashion. Riddhi, is that her name? Or?
Yeah, Riddhima
Yes.
Daga.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Wonderfully done. Wonderfully done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Naveen, you too.
I know you'll not tell anything about me.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sheikh sir, any comments, sir?
தூங்க விடுங்க பண்றாப்ல.
Sir, this was like very new and it's too overwhelming. So I think I
right.
have to read up first and then rather than to say anything. I haven't done any background reading. I think I have to do that now. I can do it better. I think so. I will read up until it comes.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
No, okay. Thanks,
Okay, thank
everyone.
you. Thank you, sir.
So we'll have a meet in the next one. Vipin, thank you.
Yeah,
We'll
okay.
present in the next time. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
All of you, thanks for joining. Yeah, bye. Take care.
Vasantan sir,
Yes, sir.
இப்போ
Yes.
நம்ம Thursday வந்து இப்போ அந்த stroke related இதுதானே சார் வரும்?
Yeah, so, I think we will have sensory thing and a part of strokes.
சரி சார். Okay sir. Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
Right,
sir.
because that paper comes first. So the earlier, my idea is to rush up and complete the papers so that we can, the later papers which are more important and theoretical, which is coming, no, from
Okay,
Anatol's
sir.
paper onwards, so we should be having free time so we can read their papers and then go ourselves prepared. Because the
Okay,
initial two papers, I think, are more of a kind of technical papers, and we have already read it. So
Okay,
I thought that we will complete it during this week.
Okay sir. Okay sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you.